I've got a first-time guest. We don't agree on everything. Today, it's the great debate here on Debt Free in 30. Let's begin.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
My guest today is Saul Schwartz, a professor emeritus at the School of Public Administration at Carleton University in Ottawa. He's got a PhD in economics. Dr. Schwartz, welcome to Debt Free in 30.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So professor emeritus means you're kind of sort of retired?
Yeah, gone.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And yet are you still teaching courses?
No. So
you're done.
I'm done.
You're done.
I'm done.
There you go. So this is fantastic. You can say whatever you want today and nobody can do anything to you. So is it as simple as that?
I don't know. They could take away my pension.
Okay, so
that would not be good.
We'll try to keep it, toned down just a bit. So your brief biography says that a consistent interest of yours over the years has been improving the economic position of low-income people, and your recent focus has been on efforts to help low-income debtors resolve their debt problems. Would you say that's accurate there?
That's pretty
Obviously,
accurate.
You've done a bunch of other stuff, but
right.
In your career, you have authored 10 million scholarly papers. I didn't count them all up, but I think it's roughly in that range. And today we're going to talk about the most recent one. We're recording this in June 2024. You're here in Toronto, and you're heading to the States to present this paper, which you have co-authored with Stephanie Banishai. Did I pronounce her name correctly there?
Yes, you did.
Who teaches at Osgoode Hall Law School, who I've met. She seems quite competent to me. And the title is Tilting the Playing Field Away from the Discharge of Debts, the Case of Consumer Proposals in Canada. Okay. Why are we fighting over that? Well, let's talk about what we're fighting over and what we agree on. So your paper is 30 pages long. This is only a half-hour podcast, so we can't discuss all of it, but I'd like to focus on one area. As listeners to this podcast know, in Canada, we have two primary forms of insolvency, consumer proposals and bankruptcy. I'm oversimplifying slightly, but let's go with it. In 2007, I did research here, okay? Show prep. In 2007, in Canada, 21% of filings were consumer proposals, so 79% of filings were bankruptcies. In the first 4 months of 2024, which are the most recent stats I've got, 79% of filings are consumer proposals and only 21% are bankruptcies. So that means the filing percentages have exactly flipped.
Correct.
Okay, so we're all in agreement on this. So I've got three questions, and the first question is, so why has it flipped? And so let's talk about the areas where you and I agree, and then we can talk about where we potentially disagree. So we both agree that they flipped. No, I mean, it's the data. Kind of hard to argue with that.
Correct.
Debtors pay more if they file a proposal rather than filing a summary administration bankruptcy. You would agree with that. I would agree with that.
Yeah, not clear how much more, but clearly more.
Yeah, and it kind of has to be because if I go bankrupt and the creditors would get $10,000 and I offer them a proposal of $6,000, why would they accept it? It doesn't make any sense. The failure rate for proposals has remained consistent at around 20% over the last 15 years.
Which is fairly low compared to similar kinds of things, similar kinds of procedures in, let's say, England and the U.S. Those failure rates are low.
Our Canadian failure rates are low.
Canadian failure rates are low.
Okay, and in your paper you talk about other jurisdictions. You've done a lot of work looking at data in other jurisdictions as well. So do you have any idea off the top of your head what failure rates would be in other jurisdictions compared to 20%?
Yeah, so in the U.S. there's something called Chapter 13, which is essentially like a consumer proposal. The failure rate is more than 50%, meaning that people can't make the payments that they've agreed to. The Chapter 13 procedure fails, and the debtor does not get a discharge of their debts. In the UK, it's quite variable, but up to 70% failure rates, but also some quite a bit lower ones.
Wow. Okay. So
we're doing really good.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. I mean, if we're doing something, you might as well bring it through to fruition. So okay. Why then? And that's good to know because I don't pay any attention to anything outside of my, four little walls here. I don't pay a whole lot of attention to anything that happens outside of Ontario, let alone the rest of the country. So I'm glad I've got someone with a bit more of a broad range of perspective here. So why do you think it has flipped? Why is it that it used to be mostly bankruptcies with a few proposals, and now it's a lot of proposals, few bankruptcies?
Okay, so in this paper, what we try to do is ask ourselves, why do people choose a consumer proposal rather than a bankruptcy? It could be because their economic situation dictates that they should do a proposal rather than a bankruptcy. But one of the things we find is that not much has changed if you look at the economic situation of the debtors who filed for bankruptcy or proposals in 2011 versus 2019. So it's not because people got a lot richer, so that suddenly they bought more houses, so they should do proposals instead of bankruptcy. That's not it. What it comes down to, and we've talked about this, is that there's stuff going on that we cannot observe that seems to be causing most of the change. What are those things that we can't observe? Let me propose two things. One is LITs, you.
Mm-hmm.
As a group, perhaps, LITs are saying, hey, we think proposals are better. It's better for people to pay. If they can pay, they should pay. That could be just a change in what advisors are telling the debtors. But there's another option, which I actually got from you, from your excellent documentary called Debtors. And it could be, I don't think this is true for 80%, but maybe for 20, 30%, we don't know. Maybe what's going on is they've been offered the cost of getting a discharge for them might be more, but the monthly payment might be lower. So just like when you buy a car, as you say quite eloquently in the documentary, you're paying a lot more for the car. You could buy a car for $50,000 cash, or you could pay $75,000 over a 5 or 6 year period. And people want that. People go for the car loan because the monthly payment is lower. And it could be that for some of those folks, some of those 80%, the amount that they would have to pay in a bankruptcy because of surplus income payments that some people have to make is bigger monthly payment than they would have to pay in the proposal, even though they're paying that lower amount for more years. So it could be they've been debtorized in the same way that people started taking out car loans, people started taking out mortgages. Farther back, people started to buy Singer sewing machines on installments. They knew they were paying more over the course of the process, but they did it anyway because the monthly payment was lower. So both of those are unobservable. We can't observe what LITs are saying to debtors. We can't get inside the heads of the debtors. But those two possibilities.
Okay, and this is very interesting. And of course, I can tell you what goes on in my head. I can't tell you what goes on in anybody else's head. And we're going to take what you just said and cut that into a commercial for Debtors. It's going to be like all over the internet now.
It's actually pretty good.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And we tried to. That's exactly why we did it. We wanted to present some ways of thinking that people hadn't thought about. So what you're saying, I completely agree with. Somebody comes into my office and I say, okay, if you go bankrupt, you have to make a payment based on your income, surplus income. So in 2024, a single person is allowed to make $2,610 a month. So let's call it $2,600 a month. If we look at your numbers and we go, oh, your paychecks are going to total $3,600 a month, you're $1,000 over the limit. The penalty you got to pay is half of that, $500 a month. And if it's your first time bankruptcy, you would be bankrupt for 21 months. So the math is pretty simple. 21 months times $500, $10,500. So what we could do is instead offer a consumer proposal to the creditors. Maybe we offer them $200 a month for 5 years. That's $12,000. Maybe they'd say, no, that's not enough. We want $300 a month. That's $18,000 over 5 years. What you said is exactly right. If they do a proposal for $18,000, that's quite clearly more expensive than a $10,000 bankruptcy, but the monthly payment is $200 or $300, not $500. Therefore, maybe it's easier to manage from a cash flow point of view.
And a key point here is, in both cases, the stay on collections is in place. Whether they file for a bankruptcy or file a proposal, the creditors are not coming after them. The phone calls stop. whatever harassment they might be getting from the creditor stops, yeah, they got to pay $300 a month, but you have helped them realize that they can afford that if they still keep their job, if nothing terrible happens going forward, they might be thinking, and we don't know this, let me emphasize, they might be thinking, okay, $300 a month, I can deal with that. My debt problem is solved in the sense that nobody's calling me anymore about my credit card debt. I'm paying $300 a month. Yes, it's going to be 5 years of that, but at the end of that, I will be debt-free, basically. And maybe that is more powerful than the $500 a month for 21 months. But don't forget, and this is a question for you, how many people in your practice, let's say, have surplus income?
Well,
what percentage?
In Toronto here, it would be a very significant percentage, because to rent you know what a condo is like in Toronto. Small and expensive. Exactly right. So a condo the size of this room we're in right now might cost you $2,000 a month. Okay, you're allowed to earn $2,600 a month, and then surplus income kicks in. So it is almost impossible to live in Toronto and earn less than $2,600 a month if $2,000 is going to your rent and you still want to eat, have transportation, whatever. So it would be very common for someone in Toronto to be making $3,000, $3,500 or more per month. And I'm talking about a single person. Obviously, if there's two of you, it could be a bigger number. So in the bigger cities, surplus income is very common.
Well, certainly in Toronto and Vancouver.
Yes,
I'm not sure about
absolutely.
The others.
And even if you go to a place like Kitchener, okay, well, rents are still high in Kitchener. And, Waterloo, it's a high-tech zone. You go to Ottawa, again, it's not like you're living for $500
so
a month. So
your view is that if 80% of the people are doing proposals, most of them probably would face surplus income requirements if they tried to file for
Yes, bankruptcy. I would say that is true. And again, I would have to go through the numbers specifically and prove that. But yes, that's what I would say. Now, you hit on another point, though, which is, well, what are the LITs saying? So let's get into the mind
because the LITs are also making more money on proposals.
And that is...
As is the Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy.
Yes. So as an LIT, I get compensated based on a tariff, which is set by the government. And so in a bankruptcy, I get this percentage of that and then this percentage of that and whatever.
You get a couple $1,000s per case.
Yeah, the more money that's in a bankruptcy, the more I get paid. Although in a summary administration, it's capped. It only goes up to a certain amount. And so even if the person has more realizations, they get a huge tax refund, they had some assets, I'm still capped unless I convert it to an ordinary administration. In a consumer proposal, the tariff is I get $1,500 plus some miscellaneous disbursements for filing fees and such and such. And then I get 20% of the money that is distributed to the creditors. So if the debtor is paying $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in their proposal, I'm making really good money. And so,
but that's got to be pretty uncommon.
Well, yeah, because if you're making huge payments, you're probably just paying your debts. We would have to have the right combination of significant debts and significant income, and your debts are so high that you couldn't do anything else.
And again, you will know better than I, but that seems like a person who probably does not need to be in the insolvency world.
Yes.
Because they've got pretty high income. Yes, they have big debts, but maybe they have equity in their house. They can probably pay off their debts without filing for.
Yes. And and the vast majority of our clients do not have equity in their house because they're not homeowners. Right. It's like over the last year or so, it's been 5 or 6% of our clients are homeowners.
Which is generally true across the country.
Exactly. That's not unique to us. So it's, you're right. There's that kind of sweet spot. However, what you're kind of alluding to here is, as a nefarious trustee, I can go, well, I've done the math, and in a bankruptcy, I'd end up making $2,000. But if I can convince you to do a proposal, maybe I'll make $4,000.
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be nefarious. I think certainly there's a feeling that's, I think, quite common amongst insolvency professionals that if you're someone who makes a pretty good income, you've got heavy debts, but if you can pay, if it's possible for you to fund that $300 a month that we were talking about, you should, even if you'd be way better off with the bankruptcy. So that it doesn't have to be, I'm going to make more money. It could be an ideological position. growing over time, tilting the playing field toward the creditors, which is, hey, you could pay. Yes, you could get out of it paying by filing for a summary administration bankruptcy, but you could pay, and therefore I think you should pay, and therefore I will recommend a proposal.
Yes, and in a bankruptcy, the creditors have the ability to object to it ending. They can't object to it starting, which is the exact opposite of a proposal. In a proposal, the creditors have to accept it. More than 50% of the dollar value have to say yes to it. So I will say to debtors, well, we could go straight to the bankruptcy option, but if one of the creditors or more thinks that you could have filed a proposal, they can object to your discharge. We end up in bankruptcy court, and they say to the bankruptcy judge, hey, look, I mean, he took the bankruptcy route when a proposal was viable.
Right.
So that's another very minor factor that doesn't happen.
I think that's right. So there's a form that the LIT has to fill out, which asks the question, could this person have filed, was a proposal viable? You have to say no.
Yes, it's the report of the administrator on the consumer proposal.
So the threat of the creditors objecting to the discharge in a summary administration bankruptcy exists, but I think it's fairly rare for that to occur.
Yes,
and I think you agree. But it is possible.
It is. I agree with that. The other difference between the two procedures is the impact on a credit report.
Right.
And everybody is obsessed with their credit score.
Yes.
Maybe not you, maybe not me, but in general, we've all got an app on our phone and we can track in real time to see what my credit score is. And
pay them sometimes too.
Oh yes, it's a big money making thing. So it's very common. Equifax, for example, reports a consumer proposal for 6 years from the day you start. A bankruptcy purges 6 years from when it ends. Well, if it's and this is Equifax, TransUnion does it slightly differently. So if it's a 21-month bankruptcy, well, then it's on your credit report for almost 8 years versus 6 years in a proposal. And if you pay the proposal off quicker, like a lump sum proposal, for example, because your parents gave you the money, then it purges 3 years after you pay it. So there could be a significant difference there. One's an R7, one's an R9, and so on. So
R7 versus R9, to my mind, are the same. I know they're not exactly the same, but they're
compared to R1. They're both much higher, but people think of it,
if people are obsessed by their credit rating, that may play a role. But I guess, again, this is something we disagree on. Those things don't strike me as particularly salient in large numbers. Remember, we're talking about going from 20% consumer proposals to 80% consumer proposals over an 8-year period. Or 10-year period, let's say.
Yeah. So you've already given us two answers to the question then. So why do you think that flip has happened then?
Okay. So my answer is I don't know, but it's not anything we observe. It's not that your assets got bigger or your liabilities got bigger or your income got bigger, because basically those things are about the same on average for debtors in 2011 as in 2019, adjusted for inflation. So what is it? It's something unobserved. And I'm thinking, okay, what is it that I don't observe that might cause some people to choose a consumer proposal over a summary administration bankruptcy? First, I came up with, it's those LITs. They're either nefarious or they ideologically believe that people who can pay should pay, and they identify the people who they think can pay. And they're right, by the way, because that's the importance of that 20% failure rate. If LITs were just pumping people into proposals when they couldn't carry out the proposal, you'd see that failure rate be much higher. And that's what happens in the UK. The first payments in the UK go to the administrator. So they don't care if it fails as long as it doesn't fail right away. So they push people, well, again, it's unobserved, but the fear is, and there have been a couple studies by the equivalent of the OSB that suggest that they're doing that. They're just pushing people into these consumer proposal-like procedures, and then just not, even if they can't pay, all they got to do is pay the first few months, and the administrator is fine because they got their much higher fees than LITs get. But so one reason, the reason is these unobserved things. I can come up with LITs. I was pretty convinced, I already knew this, but I was much more convinced after watching Debtors that people will pay $75,000 for a car that only would cost them $50,000, but they're paying the $75,000 over a 5 or 6 year period. They know that. They just are interested in the payment. They can afford the payment. They're willing to pay more. And that could be going on with some people in this consumer proposal world. They pay more for sure with the consumer proposal, but the monthly payment is lower. They can do it. Now, the question for me and for you is, do those two, even if we accept that those two things are going on, I don't think they account for that 20 to 80 increase, which means there's got to be some people, which to me means there's some people, I don't know if it's half of the 80% or a third of the 80%, who would be better off with a bankruptcy. Because remember, if they don't have surplus income, they pay the trustee, not up front, but over the 9 months of the bankruptcy, and they're discharged of their debts. So it's not 500 versus 300. It's basically 0 versus 300. And then I don't know why those folks are filing proposals.
Well,
what do you think?
So first of all, it's very interesting that the reason for consumer proposals is that we become debtized. That's very, very interesting. We'll use that in a promotional clip too. But you're correct. In a summary administration bankruptcy, if you have no surplus, no assets, pretty clean case, then okay, maybe you're going to end up paying me a couple of $1,000 or something over the 9 months, $250 a month, whatever it is. You lose your tax refund, but that's certainly cheaper than a $100 a month proposal for 5 years, which is $6,000. So my theories, well, one of them is, as a trustee, a bankruptcy is difficult to administer because there's a lot of stuff I got to do. Even if there's no assets, no nothing, there's still stuff I got to do. So in a consumer proposal, all the work is done up front. Might have to do some negotiating with the creditors. Once they've agreed to it, you got to do 2 counseling sessions and make the payments, and that's it.
And you also have to supervise the debtor in making sure that they're making the payments for 5 years. It's not no work.
That's right. No, you're exactly right.
There is more work.
And we have the vast majority of our clients are making payments either weekly or biweekly because that's how they get paid. So there could be 240 payments during the life of a proposal. And if something goes wrong, a payment bounces, we got to follow up wherever. So you're absolutely right. It is not no work. But in a summary administration bankruptcy, which is the simplest form of bankruptcy there is, I got to do all the same upfront stuff as I've got to do in a proposal, but I'm also required to monitor your income, because how do I know if you have surplus income if you don't tell me? And the most common way to do that is, well, send me your pay stubs every month and I'll keep an eye on it. We have to file your tax returns. And okay, that's good because I guess I get the money. But it also means I got to file the tax returns. I got to follow up with you, get the information, get them filed, wait for CRA. So that's, more cumbersome. I do have to realize on assets. So if you've got a non-exempt RSP or some other investment account, I got to send a letter to the bank and okay, there's $50 there and I'm back and forth with them for 6 months so they can send me the $50 or whatever it is.
So you're making my point. Bankruptcy is more work for LITs and the proposal gets them more money.
Yeah. And yeah, exactly right. Bankruptcy, more work, less money. Proposal, less work, more money.
So are we agreeing that some chunk, I'm not saying all of them, but some chunk of that 80% are doing proposals because the LIT wants them to do a proposal, not because it's necessarily in their financial best interest? We haven't talked about the other point which you've made and which I agree with, which is people really do want to pay their debts. Mm-hmm. So there could be people who know they would be better off with the summary administration bankruptcy, but they do a proposal because they feel that they ought to pay their debt.
Right. It's the honorable thing to do. I can't pay them in full, but with a bankruptcy, I'm ramming it down their throats, whereas in a consumer proposal, the creditors agree, so we're both on the same page.
Yeah, but how many people? The question again is, how many people are we talking about?
It's certainly not 0, but it's also certainly not 100%. So it is an interesting conundrum. And yes, you are absolutely correct. If I am faced with a situation where, it could go either way, okay, well then yes, in my own self-interest, the proposal is probably the better way to go because nothing catastrophic can happen. In a bankruptcy, if the debtor drops off the face of the earth, now I've got to go to court at the end of it to end the bankruptcy. And court is never simple and painless. So that, yes, I totally agree. That's one of the factors. Now, there is another factor that we have not discussed, and this accounts for some percentage of that increase. Again, I don't know how much, and that is the unregulated debt advisors.
Right. And I think we're going to disagree on this point. You've pointed me to the Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy's report on this issue. And what I got out of it was there's a bunch of LITs out there who are working in tandem with debt advisors. These unregulated debt advisors charge the debtors some money, and all they do is say, go see Doug Hoyes. But not,
They don't come and see me, trust me.
Right.
But yes, go see an LIT.
Go see an LIT.
A specific LIT that we're going to refer you to.
A specific LIT who will remain unnamed and is not Doug Hoyes. And so it's a collusion thing that the superintendent is worried about, because the superintendent, to their credit, are the regulators of LITs. They keep track of the qualifications and the behavior of LITs. So what I got out of that is, yes, it's a potential problem, but the problem is not only the debt advisors, it's the debt advisors in coordination with some LITs.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And so and again, frequent viewers of this podcast know exactly what I'm talking about, because we've done many podcasts on it, but you see that ad on Facebook or Instagram or MySpace or wherever the kids are going these days, is, hey, we can settle your debts for 20 cents on the dollar. Don't go bankrupt. Don't see an LIT. Come and see us. And so you talk to these people who are very friendly. They got, happy staff, the whole bit. You end up sending them a $3,000 retainer, which of course you got as a cash advance on your credit card. And they gather all your information and they set you up with an LIT to file a proposal. If you come to see me directly, I'm not allowed to charge an upfront fee. So as a debt advisor, how do you make money? Well, not by telling someone to go bankrupt. No one's going to pay you $3,000 for that. Whereas if you tell them, oh, we got this special thing, and then at the last minute, it's sort of like, okay, there's one more court officer you got to meet with to sign the papers. They never exactly explain it to you. I think the debt advisors are pushing essentially all of their clients into consumer proposals. If they need to file a bankruptcy, they're not dealing with them because they can't make any money off it.
And you think the scope of the activities of these debt advisors is large enough to account for 80,000 proposals, or a big chunk of 80,000?
Well, we know for a fact, because again, we're quoting from the superintendent's report, and I'll put a link in the show notes, the adverse effects of the debt advisory marketplace on the insolvency system. And this was, the superintendent released a report, I think in 2019, but then another one in 2023, December of 2023. And what she said in her report was that in 2022, in some provinces, up to 40% of consumer proposals were referred by debt advisors.
Yeah. And if that's right, then I'm totally in agreement that debt advisors are a big problem. But I actually did not see in that, maybe this is my pedantic academic view of the world, I didn't see it. Like, how does she know that?
I'll tell you how. Because on the assessment certificate,
what is that?
So when a debtor files an insolvency, the trustee has to assess them, and I have to sign off saying, okay, I've explained that they've considered a consumer proposal, a Division I proposal, or a bankruptcy. This is the option they've picked, and here is the advice they have paid for before coming to see me. They went to see Joe, the debt advisor. Here's how much they paid him. This was his name. This was his address. This was everything. Now, this is a recent thing. This was not there, I don't believe, in 2019. I think this is over the last 2 or 3 or 4 years. And effective July 15th, 2024, all of that information will not just be on the assessment certificate, which is not a sworn document. It will be moved to Form 79, the Statement of Affairs, which is a sworn document. So the level of robustness of that information is going to get even bigger. Now, if the debtor says to me, the debt advisor told me to say I paid $300. Okay, I guess I put that down, and that's that, right? I think the superintendent's numbers have to underestimate what that is, because how else is it possible? She did say that over $20 million in fees in 2021 and 2022 were paid to debt advisors.
These are all coming from these assessment certificates.
I assume. Now, I know, again, for a fact, it's on the OSB website, that she now has a special program where she is doing a more detailed review of the offending trustees. So
Right.
they're actually going to be doing a deep dive on trustees. And it's not really that hard to figure out who's getting work from debt consultants, because if I'm getting work in that town 500 kilometers away and I'm not there, how am I attracting those clients? Okay, I guess there's Google and whatnot, but if my practice, we know that in Ontario it's 80% proposals, 20% bankruptcies. Well, if you do 100% proposals, that's a little strange. How is that happening? So my point is, I don't think that accounts for the entire flippening. It's like the halving in Bitcoin, except it's the flippening. We've created a new term here.
And debticides.
And debticides, there you go. So, but I think that has accounted for some percentage.
So now we've got three. We've got LITs ideologically believing in proposals, can pay, should pay. We've got deticizing, people preferring the lower payment, even though it's going to lead to more money in the end. And now we've got these debt advisors who we have not in our work considered. We don't have access to those forms, the estate assessment forms.
Yep.
We will, hopefully,
Yep.
when they're part of Form 79, because Form 79 forms part of the data we use.
Yes.
So that's three, and maybe that's it. Maybe that's the answer.
Well, and I think we talked about incomes, and you're right that the superintendent's threshold goes up every year. Has it gone up as fast as income has gone up? Well, no, there's always a lag. The superintendent's thresholds have never made any sense.
No, they're based on Statistics Canada low income cutoff, which Statistics Canada is very clear is not to be used as a poverty line, but really is a poverty line, which means that the threshold is you're poor.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the same threshold if you live in downtown Toronto or the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
So
it's adjusted somewhat for region.
Well, the
superintendent's
threshold. No, it's the same across the country. So, okay, how is that possible? Now, I'm not criticizing the superintendent here on this because I don't want her auditing me if she's watching this, but it's a very difficult thing to, like, what are you going to do? Come up with a different threshold for every postal code?
They do come up with different thresholds for geographic areas, for Toronto versus Kitchener versus Regina.
But I guess, okay, what I'm going to do before I file my bankruptcy then is I'll just change my address to my mother's address who lives north of Steeles, so she's not in Toronto, so I get a cheaper bankruptcy. So I understand that there are many different complications, but the flippening began back with the big changes in 2008, 2009.
And we should say that what happened in 2007, 2009 was it used to be your, correct me if this is wrong, your liabilities had to be less than $75,000. And then it got switched. And if it was more, you had to do a more complicated kind of thing.
Yeah,
and then it got bumped up to $250,000. And that for sure is going to increase the number of people who can do it.
So, and you're talking about, in order to be able to file a consumer proposal, your unsecured debts, not including the mortgage on your principal residence, can't be more than $250,000 now. It was $75,000 then. Well, of course, that number hasn't changed since 2009.
Right.
Has there been any inflation since 2009?
Not in housing prices.
No, not at all. Not at all. Leave your comments below if you think I'm wrong on that one. So I think that would probably be the other factor that has perhaps contributed to all this. So okay. Final question then is, neither you nor I know the answer, but we've given a whole bunch of things that are here are the building blocks of it. What do you think should be done? Let's take the assumption that there are debtors who would be better served by a more streamlined, cheaper process, who are being pushed into a more expensive process. Not everybody, but there's certainly one guy out there who meets that criteria. What solution to that problem would you propose?
Okay, so this is easy for me, at least, because my colleague Stephanie Benishai and I have been pushing this for many years, is we need a low-cost, streamlined bankruptcy procedure. Essentially, there's consumer proposals, summary administration bankruptcies. We need a super summary administration bankruptcy only for people who have very limited assets, maybe none, which is many, many folks out there, who have very limited debts, maybe up to, pick a number, $30,000 maybe, and low income. So they're not going to be able to pay their debts. They're not going to be able to do a proposal, but they also don't have $2,000 to pay in LIT. Mm-hmm. So if there was such a procedure, and there is such a procedure both in the UK and in New Zealand called debt relief orders, if they could do that for free, because for those folks, even certainly $1,000, but certainly even
$50 a month is a big number.
$50 a month is a big number if you're really poor and you're really in debt. If you're on social assistance, for example, as many people are in Toronto who have debts, they're not somehow either before they were on social assistance or somehow while they're on social assistance. They need a procedure that's very low cost, very low administration. Maybe you fill out a form and some government person in Ottawa looks at it, signs off, you're done, you're discharged. That's what we need. I don't think it's going to – there's 100,000 bankruptcies, more than 100,000 bankruptcies, insolvencies in Canada every year. I doubt if we're talking more than 5,000 or 10,000 of those, but that's going to help the poorest of debtors, the most indebted of debtors who are really have deep problems. And those are the people I'm really concerned about. If someone's got a pretty good income and they've just somehow accumulated lots of debt and they do a proposal, I'm really not worried about them. I mean, it's too bad for them, but I wouldn't go to the wall for them. But for these people who have very low income and who really, they don't have access to the bankruptcy system because they don't have $2,000 to pay an LIT.
Yeah.
I want a low income procedure for them. And LITs, I think, are worried about car washes.
Yeah, I guess I've got two concerns with what you propose. The first one is, and I know you and I disagree on this point, my attitude is, well, if you're on social assistance, who's going to garnish your wages? You don't have any. So you are creditor proof. You are immune from judgment.
Yeah.
Now, you are judgment proof. Now, of course, if you get a job tomorrow, well, then it's a totally different story. Okay, go bankrupt tomorrow then. And I have a lot of debtors in that situation. I say to them, okay, well, you got a medical issue. You can't work right now, whatever. So you don't have to worry about them garnishing your wages because you don't have any. Why don't we wait until you're better? And a lot of them will say to me, yeah, but that's pretty stressful. I got all these calls and everything. Correct. And how am I going to get over my medical situation when I'm worried about this stress?
Exactly.
And I don't have a good answer for them, frankly. So what you're saying does make sense. The other worry I would have about that. So let's take exactly what you've said. Here's the rules. You got to have less than 50 grand in debt. You've got to have a certain income.
Some rules.
Okay, so great. And I don't agree with having a government official sign off on the paper.
LITs do not like having government officials doing stuff.
Well, we don't. But it's like, okay, do you want someone from, I don't know, the Department of Motor Vehicles signing off on something? Like, have we ever, no offense to all my followers at the DMV.
Or all your followers at the OSB.
Well, yeah. And I know a bunch of them watch them. And I get along fine with all of them. They are doing a job that is not a job I would want to do. It's kind of like being an umpire in baseball. You can never win. But what happens? Okay, let's take that scenario. Let's say they come to me and the OSB says, okay, Doug Hoyes, we're going to give you $1,000 to do this. We don't need any government officials.
We, the OSB.
Right. Yeah. Because we bring in a lot of money from the 20, in addition to me getting 20% of a consumer proposal, the OSB gets 5%.
Correct.
So 25% is not going to the creditors. So we could take some of that money and subsidize you for a few $100 to fill out this form. Okay. What happens then? I fill out the form. It's a super summary administration. And then 2 days later, the guy inherits some money.
It's a problem.
Or he files, gets reassessed in his taxes. Turns out he's getting a big refund. Oh, well, that would have gone to the creditors, but now it doesn't. So it isn't a perfect system, and I don't have an answer.
Yeah, I don't have an answer either, but I do know there's an economist named Thomas Sowell, Sowell.
I'm familiar with him, yeah.
Who said there are no solutions. There's only trade-offs.
Yep.
And the trade-off is, maybe 5,000 or 10,000 debtors are going to get this super summary administration bankruptcy. And there's going to be a couple hundred of them who they're going to get an inheritance, they're going to get a tax refund, they're going to get a job, and maybe 3 months after they get this, they would have been able to do something else. Mm-hmm. I'm willing to accept that.
Yeah. And as a trustee, obviously, I'm not making money off that segment of the population anyways.
Correct.
So if someone else, if the OSB did decide to take that over, I wouldn't be too concerned about it because I'm not.
The other thing LITs are unhappy about, not unhappy, but if I said to you, Doug, how about if every year you do 10 bankruptcies for nothing, pro bono? You do pro bono work for 10 folks. And maybe you do. I don't know.
We do.
But if every LIT or many LITs committed to doing 10 or 20 bankruptcies on a pro bono basis, that would also capture those 5,000 folks.
Yeah, and the OSB has long had what's called the BAP, the Bankruptcy Assistance Program, where you can, if a trustee says, oh, no, I'm not going to take on your file, you can go to 2 or 3 other trustees and they'll sign off saying, yeah, I wouldn't do it either. And the OSB would give it to a trustee who agrees to take on those kind of files.
But nobody does it. Nobody uses that program.
It's not a thing anymore. And I mean, if someone comes in to me and says, look, here's my situation. I've got the serious medical issue. It's really causing me a whole bunch of grief or whatever. Then yeah, I'll say, you know what? I'll do your bankruptcy. I know I'm not going to make any money off it. But it's the right thing to do. I'm going to do it. And so I think that captures some of those people already. But if, I'm now on social assistance, but I was self-employed for 10 years and I haven't done my taxes and they've got to get caught up and I got 47 creditors after me and it's like, oh, I'm just looking at, I know how much work it's going to be. So it is a difficult thing.
Yeah. So actually that's why I think you need this thing called a debt relief order, because for 2 reasons. One is somebody comes to you, as you were just saying, you're going to do their bankruptcy for nothing, but they had to know to come to you. Mm-hmm. There's an inequality in access to that procedure. It would be better if there was a procedure where anybody could say, okay, I don't have money to pay an LIT. I need to go to this procedure. Now, it could work with the OSB paying the LIT $1,000, or it could be that it's just a low cost thing. And if somebody has to say, yeah, you qualify, and maybe that person with 10 years of back taxes would not qualify. Mm-hmm. Someone has to set the rules. But the rules, in my opinion, there's a bunch of people out there, I don't know if it's 5,000 or 10,000 or 20,000 or 200, who need a low-cost, straightforward, simple procedure to relieve them of their debts so they can get on with their lives and so they can continue to contribute to the society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess if I had to pick a solution, because I was made the emperor tomorrow, which is unlikely to happen, could happen. I would say, okay, I think the answer is we need as streamlined a process as possible. So here's the 4 things that the criteria you have to meet. And if you do, I don't have to submit this form and I don't have to submit that form. I don't have to do this. And it doesn't have to last for 9 months and all the rest of it.
Yep.
And maybe I don't get paid anything other than the tax refund, because virtually every Canadian now gets the Canada carbon rebate. So, okay, maybe the answer is for a 1-year period, you lose your GST and your Canada carbon rebate.
Yep.
So maybe there will be $1,000 in the pot. And if I only have to do $1,000 worth of work, okay, then it becomes a wash and it works. So
if the OSB gives you the 1,000, you mean?
No, I'm saying even because I don't think the OSB is going to do that.
No, it's a cost recovery organization,
right? Exactly. But if it was okay, the work is very streamlined in these very specific situations.
Correct.
And, maybe the procedure lasts for 3 months instead of 9 months. Maybe at the end of the 3 months, the debtor has to swear that they didn't get an inheritance. We file their taxes. We receive their tax refunds, GST credits, whatever, for a 1-year period, which means there will be $1,000 in the pot. And so then it becomes a win.
In England, you won't like this either. In England, the way it works is the debt relief order is administered by a government official. Mm-hmm. So there's no LIT involvement. There's no private sector involvement.
And we had something similar to that in Canada in the 70s.
Which LITs think was a total failure and disaster.
Yeah. And I was, of course, not born until 1992, so I don't have any recollection of that whatsoever. How long ago was 1992? So, yeah,
it's 30 years.
I'm 30 years old. Sure. That's plausible. Been running the company for 25 years. So yes, and that is the prevailing view, and I wasn't there, so I have no idea. But I guess to summarize this 30-minute podcast that's been going for 45 minutes would be to say that there is an issue here. you've done more research than anyone in the history of Canada on this, and you don't know exactly where to point.
Absolutely not.
And I've been doing this for, a few decades as well, and I've got some ideas, but a lot of my stuff is anecdotal based on who I've
but you have, and the LITs have a massive amount of on-the-ground, detailed knowledge of what's going on, which I lack completely. If I don't know something, I ask Doug, what? Like he'll read something and he'll say, "You didn't get this right. It's not that. It's this." And that's true. I mean, we have this broader view, but shallower view than LIT.
What's in the book is not necessarily what happens in real life, but the book also has some knowledge to impart. So
Correct.
I think you got to look at
and rules you have to follow.
Absolutely, and there should be some rules. So. Well, I mean, I think it's something we continue to ponder. Hopefully, this has been fodder for discussion, and I'm sure I'll be getting calls from the OSB once this airs. So I'm looking forward to it. You're retired, so they can you don't have to worry about that. But
I still the OSB has been great in giving people data like Form 79 Form 79 data from 2011 and 2019, which is what we use. So they've been great. They're under pressure too, right? They're understaffed, underfunded, and so the idea of them giving you $1,000 for every
is
person
difficult.
Is hard
and
to see.
I guess the other point we didn't mention is that there was a big event in 2020. I don't know if you follow the news. And so what does the world look like today compared to then? Well, totally different, in some ways totally the same. Like people are still people, they still have debts and so on. So that's I guess, for further pondering. But that was great. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Whether we accomplished anything or not, I don't know, but we got to chat. So
we didn't hit each other.
Exactly. And we're in a pretty confined space here at the corner of King and Yonge in Toronto. So Saul Schwartz, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Doug.
So there you go. Leave your comments below, and if you've got a solution to the problems we've said, then put them down there, and we'll do them. So thank you very much for watching. You've already plugged the show, the documentary twice now. So Debtors, that was fantastic. So that you can come back anytime you want.
It's got pictures of cars from the 1950s, which remind me of the cars
there
my father
had. So people of our vintage, at least you didn't remember the sewing machines from the 30s. That's good. So so you can go to our Debt Free in 30 channel on YouTube and search for the word Debtors. We invented that word, probably. I don't know. And you can see it's a full hour-long documentary where we've kind of traced all this. And, frankly, I hadn't made the connection to consumer proposals and the whole debtized, economy that we're in. I hadn't explicitly made that connection. So that was very helpful. So I definitely think everyone should check that out. Again, subscribe, hit the notification bell. And that is our show for today. Until next week, thanks for listening. I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.